My mother-in-law ruined my wedding and didn't realize who was standing beside me. Have you ever walked into your own wedding knowing someone in the room wasn't there to celebrate? She was there to erase you? And can you imagine discovering that a perfect family isn't afraid of scandal, Bayurifikao? They're afraid of truth? She was the queen of our coastal town, chair of every charity board, owner of half the waterfront, the kind of woman people called Mrs. Harper like it was a title. From the moment I became her son's fiancé, she controlled my life. What I wore, who sat in the front row, how I smiled for photos. She decided I would sign a prenup, drop my last name, and stop working because a Harper wife doesn't get her hands dirty. But I broke her rules. I said no, and I chose a life that didn't revolve around her approval. And on my wedding day, right at the altar, in front of cameras, donors, and my entire community, she stood up and announced that I was a con artist, and the ceremony was over. The room froze. Phones rose into the air. My chest went hollow. She didn't know it would become the biggest mistake of her life. Hi, I'm Lauren Price. I'm 29. I'm from Savannah, Georgia. And I restore old houses for a living, the kind of work Mrs. Harper liked to call unladylike. If you're watching, follow this, because what happens later still makes my hand shake. And tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now. I read every comment. I really do. Now let's jump back 9 months, to the night I realized that in that family, love wasn't a feeling. It was a contract. The Harper mansion smelled like lemon wax, jasmine, and money. The kind that doesn't sit in a bank account, the kind that changes zoning laws. The fireplace was lit even though it was warm outside. Framed photos lined the room. Ribbon cuttings, charity galas, handshakes with governors. I held my glass like it could betray me. Mrs. Harper sat in a wingback chair like it was a throne, and on her lap, an actual folder, my name printed on a label. Lauren, she said softly, the way someone says, "Don't be scared," right before the needle goes in. We need to protect the family. From what? I tried to keep my smile steady. From unpredictability. You're talented, but you're not from our world. She slid a stack of papers across the table. Thick, heavy, a prenup. Clauses, conditions, rules disguised as security. I flipped through it and saw a line that made my stomach drop. I would waive any claim to property, businesses, inheritance. Then another. I would pause professional activities if they could harm the family reputation. You want me to quit my job? My mouth went dry. I want you to become appropriate, she said, perfectly calm. In our world, a wife supports. She doesn't build. Evan walked in then, her son, my fiancé, looking tired in that specific way people look with each shalm. Bani ao may maima, their whole lives divided between someone else's expectations and their own heart. Mom, don't do this again, he started. I'm not doing this again, she cut in. I'm being realistic. Evan, your career is built on trust, on your name, on people believing Harpers don't make mistakes. I set the papers back down. I'm not signing this. The room went quiet in a way that felt expensive and dangerous. Then you don't understand the rules, she said. We don't choose with our hearts. We choose what's safe. I held her gaze. I choose differently. Something in her expression cracked, just for a second. Remember this, Lauren, she said. In our world, freedom is privilege you earn. The irony is, the wrong person wasn't Evan. I was the wrong person to their world, and he knew it. We didn't meet on a yacht or at a gala. We met in a tiny laundromat near one of my restoration sites, a 1906 house I was trying to save from demolition. I had dust on my hands and wiring diagrams spread across a folding table when he walked in wearing a plain t-shirt, holding a bag of detergent, with the kind of calm eyes that don't evaluate you. "You've got something on your cheek," he said and handed me a napkin. "It's plaster," I muttered. "It decided I belong to it." He smiled like I'd just reminded him what real life sounds like. "I'm Evan." We talked while machines hummed and quarters clinked. Not about circles or status or names. About how old wood smells, like rain, when you sand it the right way. About the difference between saving a house and turning it into a trophy. And at some point, I realized he was looking at me like a person, not a project. For the first time in weeks, I felt seen. There were two odd details I noticed then, but I brushed them off. First, on his keyring, there was a matte black metal tag. No logo, no brand, like something that belonged to doors you couldn't just walk through. Second, when his phone lit up, he didn't answer. He glanced at the screen and his face shifted, just for a second, into something sharper, focused, almost trained. Then he declined the call and said, "Wrong number." A week later, Mrs. Harper already knew everything about me. Where I studied, how much I owed on my student loans, that my father was gone, that I sometimes worked nights because deadlines don't care about your feelings. She called it concern. It was a file. She invited me to a ladies' lunch. White tablecloths, perfect smiles, voices like knives wrapped in silk. And she started, casually, sweetly. "Lauren is so independent. Sometimes I can be such a..." Women laughed politely, like it was a charming little observation. My fingers tightened around my fork. Later, she cornered me alone by a window overlooking their private dock. "You will sign the prenup," she said. "And you will stop pulling Evan into your chaos." "This is my life," I said. "No," she replied. "This is a phase." Then her voice cooled. "The ultimatum is simple. Either you become part of this family on our terms, or you disappear from my son's life." I could have broken right there. I could have apologized for existing. Instead, I said, "If your family needs fear to hold it together, it isn't a family." That's the first time she raised her voice. "You think you're special? This town breaks people who think the rules can be rewritten." The night Evan proposed, we weren't in a ballroom. We were sitting on the front steps of my job site, surrounded by exposed beams and the smell of old brick. I showed him the prenup. He stared at it too long, too quiet. "I'm tired of living like an asset," he finally said. "Let's do this for real." He pulled out a small box. "Marry me," he said. Not the name, not the image. Me. I said yes, barely loud enough to hear it over my own heartbeat. And then something strange happened. A car rolled up in the dark with its lights off, slow, like it was scanning the place. Evan stood immediately, positioning himself in front of me, and he said, low and urgent, "Don't go outside." The car paused, then drifted away. "Who is that?" I asked. He smiled, too fast. "No one, just neighborhood security." But our neighborhood didn't have security, and security doesn't move like that. After the engagement, everything collapsed like a house with termites in its foundation. My bank reassessed my loan. My interest rate jumped. A supplier suddenly canceled contracts due to internal policy. A client backed out because of reputational concerns. Friends stopped answering texts. People who used to hug me at local events suddenly forgot my name. Even my favorite coffee shop felt colder, like my face had become a warning label. And for the first time, I asked myself, if you take away my status, my connections, my stability, who am I? Evan stayed. He brought groceries, hauled lumber, sat with me while I calculated how not to drown. But sometimes he'd disappear for an hour or two. He'd come back calm, too calm, like someone who had just handled something. If I asked where he'd been, he'd say, "Old stuff, don't worry." I wanted to believe him, because the alternative was fear. Mrs. Harper insisted the wedding happen in their historic church. White columns outside, stained glass inside that made you feel watched. The guest list looked like a catalog of influence. There were cameras from a local magazine, donors, politicians, a pastor with a smile practiced enough to feel hollow. As I walked down the aisle, I realized it wasn't a celebration. It was a test. Then the pastor asked, "If anyone has any objections," and Mrs. Harper stood up. Slow, elegant, like she'd been waiting for her cue. "I object," she said, and her voice cut through the church, "because this woman concealed information that makes this marriage a mistake." A ripple of whispers. Phones came out. She held up an envelope. "I have documents," she announced. "She's in debt. She's using my son as a lifeline. She's after our money." Someone gasped. Someone whispered, "I knew it." Someone started recording like my humiliation was content. I looked at Evan. He was pale, but not because of her accusations. He looked pale because she had decided to go all in. I took a breath, and I stepped forward to the microphone before the pastor could pull it away. I used to believe that if I was quiet enough, agreeable enough, appropriate enough, I would be accepted, I said. My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. I thought love was being chosen by people like you, and then saying thank you. I looked at the crowd. Perfect hair, perfect pearls, perfect judgment. But I understand something now. Love isn't a contract. It isn't a last name. It isn't permission from a committee. Then I turned to Mrs. Harper. "You want me to be ashamed that I work with my hands, that I build things, that I pay my own way?" "I'm not ashamed." My throat tightened, but the words kept coming. "I choose dignity. I choose the person who sees me as a human being, not a risk assessment. And if you came here for a tragedy, you're at the wrong wedding." "Did you expect that?" type shock if you didn't see it coming, or called it if you did. And if this story hits something in you, like it, follow, because the twist is next, and it changes everything. The wedding didn't happen. The story spread through town faster than hurricane warnings. Clients stopped calling. I took any work I could, scraping paint, cleaning brick, repairing fences. I slept 4 hours a night. Evan moved into my tiny apartment above my workshop. We ate cheap pasta and tried to laugh about how this was real romance. But at night, his phone kept buzzing. He would step into the stairwell and I'd hear fragments. "No, not yet. I told you she can't get hurt. I'll handle it." One night I asked him straight out, "Are you involved in something you haven't told me?" He took my hands and said, "I'm involved in you, in us, and I'm not letting you go." It sounded beautiful, but it made my skin go cold. A month later, Charleston hosted a public forum on historic preservation. Big stage, city officials, journalists, donors. Mrs. Harper was front row in a cream suit with a victory smile. Her family sponsored half the event. She loved these rooms because her power looked respectable in them. I didn't go looking for revenge. I went because my last project was about to be demolished, and I still hoped my voice could matter. Evan and I sat near the back. He was calm, too calm. The host stepped up and said, "Today we'll also address an audit involving several development projects suspected of violating preservation laws." Mrs. Harper didn't flinch. She was sure nothing would touch her. Then the host added, "We're joined by a representative from a federal financial crimes unit and a city audit team, an operation that has been undercover for the last 8 months." I turned to Evan. He stood up. My heart stopped. He walked down the aisle toward the stage, and the room buzzed. Someone whispered, "Isn't that a Harper?" Someone else said, "What is he doing?" Evan took the microphone. "My name is Evan Harper," he said. "And for the last 8 months, I've been working under an alternate profile as part of an investigation into money laundering through development projects and fraudulent charitable foundations." The air left my lungs. Mrs. Harper's face drained of color. She tried to stand, but security was already at the aisles. Evan continued, steady as stone. "I collected documents, records, contracts, audio, and yes, some of the people involved are from my own circle." Then he looked directly at his mother. "Including those who use their last name as a shield and reputation as a weapon." The screen behind him lit up. Flowcharts, bank transfers, photos of closed-door meetings, her foundation's name at the center like a spotlight. The room erupted into panic. Whispers, camera flashes, chairs scraping. People stood and sat like their bodies couldn't decide what to do. Mrs. Harper forced her voice out. This is a misunderstanding. He's unwell. He doesn't know what he's saying." But people with credentials were already moving toward her, and the empire she built on control started collapsing in front of the very people she'd spent years charming. Evan glanced back at me for one brief second. So human, it almost broke me. And I understood everything without him saying a word. That was why he disappeared. That was why he warned me not to step outside. That was why he sometimes came back too calm. He had been trying to keep me away from the blast radius. After the forum, Mrs. Harper tried the only thing she knew, negotiation. She showed up at my workshop alone, no entourage, no practiced smile. For the first time, she looked like a person, not a title. "Lauren," she said quietly, "let's forget this. You're smart. We can fix it. I can help you." I stared at her and saw something I didn't expect. Someone who believed love could be purchased with control. Evan stood beside me. "Mom," he said evenly, "you're not helping. You're bargaining." She snapped, "I was protecting the family." "You were protecting power," I said. "A family doesn't break people to save face." Her mouth opened, then closed, like the words weren't obeying her anymore. "What do you want?" she asked. Evan took one step forward. "Boundaries," he said, "and accountability, not a deal." And for the first time, she had no leverage left to pull. We didn't have that wedding. We had a different one. Small, by the water, no cameras, no committees. I reopened my restoration business under my own name and took projects I used to be told were too risky. Evan stopped being a Harper son and became a man who chose truth. Even when it burned bridges, here are the 3 things I learned. If someone loves you, they don't control you. Status ends where fear begins. Boundaries aren't cruelty, they're self-respect. Thanks for listening. Follow, turn on notifications if you want more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, could you go against an influential family if you loved someone for real? I read every single one,